So, what's up, people, and welcome to the Mission 106 discussion of Spy Family. So, Mission 106 came out about a week ago, and as always, I will leave a link to this mission that's currently being shown on the publisher's official website, Manga Plus, for free to the North American audience. So, if you're interested, I will go take a look at it before they pull this mission back. Okay, so Mission 106. Mission 106 was one of those missions where it was a relatively short chapter, or should I say not in length, but in the amount of time that it took to read it. And that's because the chapter was mostly images, and there was very little dialogue to move the story through. And yet, considering how little the dialogue was, and how quickly you could actually get through the chapter, this chapter was relatively deep in the meaning that it had and the impact it would have to the story. And so this chapter revolves around Damien, or should I say the Desmond family. And the chapter begins in something that almost reminds me of Hunter x Hunter, with the servants of the Desmond family reminding me of the servants of the Zoldike family in Hunter x Hunter. Probably a less intense version of them, but it seemed like they also have skills, namely to keep the family protected. And it is cool to see the servants in this manner. And it turns out that they're relatively upbeat, as one of the servants says that she is going to make sure that Damien is well protected during his visit to the estate. And we see Damien trying to talk to Demetrius, his brother, mostly to get help with his homework. But like usual, Demetrius basically brushes him off and tells him basically to get lost, right? And so Damien is feeling dejected as usual, and then he gets somewhat attacked by a dog, and he falls into a river, but he doesn't get too upset because it's not really because of anger that the dog attacked him. It was because of affection. He wanted to play with Damien, and it got a little bit out of hand. And considering the fact that Demetrius just brushed him off, despite how this attack turned out, Damien was actually quite grateful for the dog to be so affectionate towards him. But it turns out that the servants are not particularly happy because Damien fell into the water and he was wet. And it was becoming close to dinner time, and Damien's like, so what? What's so special about dinner? And that's when the servants tell him that today all of the family members will be joining for dinner, including his father, Donovan. And the scene you see of Donovan and Desmond coming into the estate, you kind of get the understanding of why the servants are so uptight right now. Because he has that if looks could kill sort of stare. And we find out that it's a very rare occasion. But it turns out that it was Donovan who actually wanted to have this family dinner. He seemed to have some time off, which was very rare. And so he wanted to spend this time with his family. And so you see all of the family members like Melinda and Demetrius and of course Damien come to the family dining area. And as I said, this was a relatively short sort of chapter because there was very little dialogue. And from this point on, there is literally silence during the time that they're eating dinner. And you could tell that it's an awkward situation. And the small conversations that happen during the dinner time seem to be extremely shallow. And we as readers get uncomfortable watching them eat dinner without speaking. And I think that was done on purpose by Tatsuya Endo to get us to understand how the members of the family felt during a family get-together. This was no wholesome event. It was extremely uncomfortable. And so the majority of this entire time is done by imagery. And I will have to say that Tatsuya Endo did a really, really good job of making people understand just how awkward this situation was. And finally, Damien gets to a point where he can't hold back anymore and he tries to make small talk with his father. But considering the stare that he gets back, he can't continue. And so this entire scene shows this very distant sort of feeling during what would be a wholesome occasion. And finally, Demetrius excuses himself, and so does Melinda, and that of course leaves Damien with his father. And what's interesting is despite how awkward this situation is, Donovan actually says the most wholesome comment during this entire chapter, which was that this has been the most worthwhile evening. And of course, you may feel that he is just making comments up, but considering that Donovan has up till now been a very upfront sort of person, I have a feeling that he actually meant that. And Damien, being the only person who heard that, felt that he had to eat his dinner properly just to make this dinner worthwhile. And in the very end, Damien asks his servant Jeeves what his father meant by worthwhile. And Jeeves answers it meant that your father enjoyed being able to have the meal with everyone. And isn't that how you took it? And of course, Damien tends to agree. And so you seem to feel that there actually is a much closer relationship between Damien and Jeeves than he has with his father. And so this turned out to be a very interesting reflection back again to the family and just how dysfunctional the family is. On the outside, it seems to be relatively civil, but there doesn't seem to be any connection between any of the family members. And I thought that this chapter was very good in expressing that. And as much as I have to say that that was the biggest point in this chapter, I found that I got the most out of it from the comments section rather than the chapter itself. And in the comments section, people were making some interesting comments about how Donovan was maybe using his powers similar to Anya. And I was like, well, what the heck does that mean? Where did they get that idea that Donovan would have telepathic abilities? And of course, since Anya got her telepathic abilities from Project Apple, this of course implied that Donovan also was a subject of Project Apple. And I really didn't understand what they meant until you kind of go back to the scenes where he comes out and you realize that, yes, Donovan Desmond, as you can see here, clearly has stitches on his head. And so I went back to all the earlier chapters where Donovan Desmond came out. And sure enough, I didn't notice it at that time, but he has stitches on his head throughout this entire series, which seems to indicate that he had some sort of operation regarding his brain. And so I could understand why people link that to Project Apple, and if that was the case, people would make a theory that Anya was the test subject and Donovan was the final product. And I don't know if that's really the case, because if that was the case, Lloyd will be completely exposed, because during the conversations with Donovan, he would have been able to read Lloyd's mind just the way Anya does. And if that happened, I don't think he would have survived after that. However, regardless of Project Apple, regardless of telepathic capabilities or not, Donovan Desmond had some sort of operation to his brain. And so why was that the case? Was that due to Project Apple? And is that due to something else that the scientists of that group wanted for Donovan Desmond? I don't know. There may be a couple of possibilities. One is that the government is using Donovan Desmond as a puppet. And to do so, they had to basically lobotomize him. But the other possibility may be that during his past, he underwent a severe trauma to his head. One possibility is that he was attacked by people of the West and got injured and had to have brain surgery to keep him alive. And if that's the case, then it will be very interesting, because that may have been one possible reason for why the last war ended, because although the East was maybe winning, the West somehow took down the leader, and because of that, due to the risk of not having their leader in command, the East retreated. I'm not sure. But it also potentially explains the dysfunctional nature of this family. and the separation between Melinda and Donovan. Because for all we know, maybe they were able to save his life, but the Donovan Desmond that remained no longer was the person that he used to be. And because of that, that put distance between him and Melinda because he wasn't the person that Melinda fell in love with. And so there may not have been any affair or any of that. It may just be due to a circumstance that left Donovan Desmond as he is. And if that's the case, maybe that is the reason for him being a recluse now and for his very strange actions that he has at this time. However, with regards to Operation Strix, it really doesn't give an explanation of why somebody may be wanting to have a war again. Maybe the East feels that because they didn't win the war in the past, they need to have another war to bring success to something that they didn't have in the past. I don't know. For all we know, the East actually won the war. But if that's the case, why does the West feel more economically stable than the East? And if that's the case, then maybe it's someone beyond Donovan Desmond, because if Donovan Desmond changed because of that, then there may be another dark entity that is controlling him so that they can get back at the West with another war. Of course, if Donovan Desmond was injured during the previous war, then maybe this new Donovan Desmond also has a vendetta, a personal vendetta against the West. And if that's the case, then maybe it is Donovan Desmond who is leading the group to create a war just because he is so angry at what the West did to him. It's all speculation. We have no idea if those stitches came from the war. For all we know, it came from Project Apple, like everybody says, and maybe Donovan does have telepathic abilities. We don't know. But it is interesting now that you see those stitches on his head. And this chapter did show that there is something very, very wrong with this family, which we always knew, but it enhances it once more with this chapter. And so it will be interesting now that Tatsuya Endo has brought the level of this family up even further, what he has in mind for the so-called big boss antagonist of this entire story. But we won't know until future chapters. And once 107 comes out, I'll bring out another video. I hope you join me at that time. But this is the chapter 106 discussion of Spy Family. If you read it, what'd you think about it? Did you feel that it was too short a chapter? Did you feel that this was actually a wholesome moment for Damien? Or did you also feel that this was an uncomfortable situation with regards to the family? And for those who noticed the stitches on Donovan's head, what do you feel is the reason for him having that? Any comments will be greatly appreciated. And until the next episode, happy manga reading. And as always, Jaya, nice day everyone.